Them people crazy. They will reset your entire algorithm. And you ain't built for none of this. This is Bedtime Stories, Grown-Up Edition, Genesis, Part 20. When we left off, the five families had successfully foiled several plots orchestrated by the International Trafficking Organization and executed or attempted by hired guns. They were in the process of concocting a plan to foil the plot for which Miss Burney was victimized. And Catherine's team was running down leads in the disappearance of Simone. Her brothers, Sincere and Saint, were preparing to head to Paris in Japan. And her sister Star was on a covert operative assignment in New York, and she had Taryn Cato right where she wanted her. And her other sister, Chantal, was in Texas, helping with the children, getting to know the family, and trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. At the same time, Natalia's big sister Courtney had all but confirmed that she was in fact the covert operative who'd shown up to Sincere and Natalia's date. Salima had saved Wise, and while he was appreciative, he wasn't too happy with the fact that Salima was in labor. Donovan was going off after Portia had showed her whole and entire behind in the hospital when they tried to discharge her. All she had to do was leave for 4 hours. Then she could return and be with Justice in the NICU. But she wasn't going. So Donovan was telling the Queen Mother and Maribel, yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and void that contract. I'm taking full custody of Justice. And as soon as Portia's released from here, I'm packing her up and sending her to the International Treatment Facility. Because I ain't doing this with her. I already did one crazy baby's mother. Maribel and the Queen Mother just looked at one another. They were both hoping that the other one would speak up. When Donovan said that he was going to see if he could get the nurse who Portia beat the hell out of to testify for him, the Queen Mother couldn't take it anymore. She said, now Donovan, I'm not going to be able to let you do that. That girl is crazier than a June bug, and I'm not all that fond of her. But she's a new mother, and I know what it feels like to have babies in the NICU. You don't know if they're going to survive. And the last thing you want is to leave the hospital and get a phone call. So as crazy as it sounds, I think you need to give her some grace. The Queen Mother had told Donovan all about her experience when her twins, Chance and Anya, were first born, and they were in the NICU. While it was nearly 40 years earlier, the hospitals had the same policy, and they didn't have all the options that they have now. Nowadays, when babies are in the NICU, once they leave their little incubator, and they move to one of them little plastic beds, most hospitals give them a private room, monitored 24/7 by nurses, where parents can stay all day and night. But before they leave the incubators, many hospitals now have guest rooms that parents can reserve so that when NICU access ends for the day, they don't have to leave the hospital. They can spend the night right there. But back when the Queen Mother was having babies, parents leaving babies in the NICU still had to be discharged from the hospital, returned several hours later, and when NICU access ended, if they didn't want to go home, they had to go to the lobby, the ER, or the parking lot and sleep or rest there until NICU access was restored the following day. So when the twins were born, the Queen Mother was discharged, and then she went back inside the hospital and sat in the lobby until the time limit that the hospital had set was up, and she slept in the car every night until her premature twins were discharged. So Donovan said, but Medea, you ain't beat nobody up. You ain't throw stuff. The Queen Mother said, don't give me too much credit. Now, I'm not certifiable like that damn Portia, but yeah, I was ready and raring to go. Your father kept me sane. He held you and your brother down while I stayed at the hospital 24/7. And then Maribel finally spoke up. She said, Donovan, you don't know how many babies I've delivered, and had to discharge the mother before their babies were discharged by the pediatrician, only to find them wringing their hands in the lobby several hours later when I was heading out. Now, my bedside manner is a little different from Portia's doctor, so I've made it a practice to give my patients pep talks. I also call and check in with them shortly before the time that the hospital has said they can return, 24 hours after discharge, and at least once if I hear that the baby's had any setbacks or one of the NICU nurses communicates a concern about the mother's mental health or her sleep or eating habits, because I know it's different when they hear from me how completely normal their entire experience is, that they are not alone, or that they're not the first, and they certainly won't be the last mother who's had to leave their babies in the NICU. And while I don't have biological children of my own, I have found that my empathy, along with a healthy support system, does wonders for alleviating the stress of new mothers. The Queen Mother said, and this is Portia's first baby. Hopefully it's her last baby with you. And Donovan just fell out laughing. The Queen Mother said, so it's a whole new world for her. I'd had 2 babies, that I got to take home with me from the hospital before your brother and sister were born, and I couldn't take them home with me. And I still felt like I was dying on the inside. Donovan asked, then what I'm supposed to do? Portia just gifted me the perfect opportunity to nullify the contract and make my life and everybody else's life in this family easier. The Queen Mother said, and just because you can, that does not mean you should. She gonna be mad at y'all for a little while. But once she gets some real medication in her, and she sees that you've chosen not to take advantage of the opportunity her mental health crisis has afforded you, I'm sure she'll get over it. Especially if you do everything you can to ensure she has access to her baby. Maribel said, and I went ahead and took the liberty, if you don't mind, of getting Portia an access code that she can enter on her television and remotely monitor justice. Donovan said, mind? All you did was remind me that I married the right woman. And if you dip off with me to the parking lot right quick. The Queen Mother said, boy, and Maribel just fell out laughing. The Queen Mother said, I'm gonna leave y'all to discuss how y'all gonna handle grown-up business. Go back and check on Selima, because she's gonna be going home without her baby too. Then the Queen Mother told Donovan that shortly after Portia's show, Selima gave birth to a 3-pound, 12-ounce baby girl who was Polynesian and Moroccan, named Alana. Spelled the Polynesian way, A-L-A-N-A, and means rising or awakening. And then she showed Donovan the first pictures of Selima and Waz with baby Alana. Meanwhile, at that same time, Chantal was making a phone call. She had to call in a favor from the church gossip. Her big cousin was relocating to Miami, and she'd be needing a ride from the airport to her hotel. She might also need some chauffeuring, just until Chantal got back to town when spring break was over. Chantal had no idea why she was making that phone call. Catherine had put her up to it and gave her very little information. All she told her was that she needed the word to get out, that a young lady she identified as a covert operative was coming to Miami, and she needed to make that phone call. She gave Chantal the covert operative's code name and the story, and Chantal made the call. What Chantal didn't know was the covert operative would be leaving Texas and heading to Miami that night, moving around Miami out in the open. And when Star wrapped up her assignment in New York, she'd be heading to Miami, but she would still be in her covert operative bag. But this time, she'd be pretending to be Chantal. She'd be connected with the yet unidentified covert operative, who would be pretending to be Chantal's cousin. And they'd make a show of being seen together, luring the organization out of Miami that the traffickers had hired to kidnap Simone. If all went well, Star, pretending to be Chantal, would be kidnapped next, and her cousin would lead the St. James team directly to where the twins were being held. The St. James team working Simone's disappearance case knew exactly what organization had Simone. They were not an ally of the Five Families. They weren't their enemy either. They just had no idea what they'd gotten themselves into. That Simone, Chantal, and Star were triplets, that Star even existed, or that they were the children of the deceased head of the St. James family. And while they had no clue that they'd been used in the ongoing war between the traffickers and the Five Families, they'd stepped on a landmine, and that landmine was going to go boom. At that same time, Q was having a very difficult conversation with Miss Charlotte and Big Wood. He just told them that Zyla's baby father had been killed by the Cato organization, and so had Big Dro. While Miss Charlotte was no longer in love with Big Dro, she still cared about him. He was the father of her 3 adult children. She'd been with him from 14 years old until just a few years ago. So she was heartbroken. If for no one else, she was heartbroken for her babies. They'd finally had a come-to-Jesus moment with their father, and were all working on developing and growing their relationships with him, independent of her and one another. And it was clear from the look on Big Wood's face that his father's death had just rocked his world. Miss Charlotte wasn't fluent in ASL, so when Big Wood was signed for whomever was visiting him, that person would translate for Miss Charlotte. And when Q asked Big Wood, "What you thinking, big dog? Talk to me." Big Wood signed, "Both of my fathers are gone. Neither of them will ever get to meet my son." And Miss Charlotte lost it. Q said, "I feel you. Everybody's belief systems are different. Personally, I'm a firm believer that since energy can neither be created or ended, and the Bible says that God knew us before the foundations of the earth, that has to mean that every one of us existed in the heavenlies before we existed on this earth. And when we leave, we don't cease existing. We just exist behind the veil. I believe that babies, toddlers, small children, and those who have the gift are able to see behind that veil. For most of us, that connection is severed as we begin to lose our innocence. The people we love and lose can still see us, even when we can't see them. And those who can see behind the veil can see them too. I have good reason to believe that both of your fathers, Quincy III and Benjamin Sr., have both had the pleasure of interacting with the soul of your son behind the veil. And when your son is born, they'll be right there to see him along his journey. Miss Charlotte said, but the Bible says that the dead know nothing. Q said, and it also says that the body can be killed, but the soul cannot. Miss Charlotte said, okay, not to derail the conversation or diminish or debate your perspective, son, but it also talks about familiar spirits. Q said, you're right, but it's referring to consulting with mediums and necromancy and divination, which is absolutely forbidden. Those practices are possible for a reason, though. Communicating with the spirits of those who've passed on is absolutely possible. It's just not advisable that we seek them out, because we can't possibly know when we attempt to crack that veil, whether we're interacting with the spirits of those who we love or demonic spirits pretending to be the ones that we love. If you believe differently than I do, I respect that. There's some things we just can't know until we go to the other side. I can just tell you about my personal experience and what God told me about it. My paternal grandmother was deceased before I was born. When I was 2 or 3 years old, I was playing in my room and I saw a woman who I knew wasn't really there. She talked to me and I'd never been told not to talk back, so I did. And she told me things that I've seen come to fruition. I won't go into that. What's important is I went and told my mother. She asked me to describe the woman, so I did. Then she showed me a picture I'd never seen before. It was a picture of my paternal grandmother. And because she'd had a similar experience as me, she was able to give me some rules of engagement. She told me not to seek out those who'd passed over to the other side, not to take any action on their behalf if they came to me, to tell her any and everything that I experienced, and to pray about whatever I saw or heard, and to test the spirit by the spirit. I had other experiences. I was never afraid. I did everything she said. And the day that my brother Chance died, my paternal grandmother came to me. She told me not to get in the car with my mother that day, because God had plans for my life. I ain't even know what that meant, but I begged my mother to stay home. She didn't listen. I decided that I'd tell her about what my grandmother said when she came home and ask her what it all meant. But she ain't come home. She was gone for over a month and my brother died. And had I gotten that car, I'd have been dead too. And Miss Charlotte and Big Wood were both speechless. Meanwhile, the meetup between Miss Bernie and the female mercenary went off at the Salvation Center of Dallas without a hitch. The mercenary's demands were simple. Miss Bernie could take one of the children and deliver them to the mercenaries, or she could create a situation where the mercenaries could take one of the children. It was her choice, but she had 72 hours to decide. When she returned to her and Liza's house at the family complex in Denton, she told Angela, the Queen Mother, and Liza just that. And Liza was floored. The Queen Mother was pissed. And Angela was ready for war. She said, let me guess. They want this child to be mine and Q's. And they don't want Michael or Melissa because they already know they can't handle them. Miss Bernie said, they want Isla. Isla was the youngest of Q and Angela's children. She was the twin of Quincy V, who was affectionately known as V. And Isla was deaf. The mercenaries had taken one too many hits, resulting in one too many losses. And after their foiled attempt at snatching Wise, they were ready to take the gloves off. Miss Bernie pulled out a Ziploc bag and showed it to Angela, the Queen Mother, and Liza and said, this is poison ivy. They want me to rub it on Isla while the kids are outside enjoying their playtime. The Queen Mother said, and then what? You supposed to take Isla to the doctor? Why would they even think that would work? Miss Bernie said, because they've read all of my text messages. Miss Bernie was the one who was always hyper-focused on the children's health. Any cough, sneeze, slightly elevated temperature. And Miss Bernie was texting or calling their parent, isolating them from the other children just in case whatever they had going on was contagious, and demanding that they see a doctor. And she never took no for an answer. So that's why they thought it would work. When Angela said as much, the Queen Mother said, that's why you should have had some kids, Bernie. Something is always wrong with a kid. and it does not always require medical intervention. Ms. Bernie said, I know that, but when I'm responsible for somebody else's child, I don't take no chances. Angela said, and that's one of the main reasons why we trust you with our children. And it's why we do whatever you ask. And I'm sure that's what they're banking on. Then she called LJ and said, how quickly can you get us a baby reborn, identical to Isla in size, weight, and appearance? I'm also going to need a finisher or a covert operative who can pass for Miss Bernie. When the call was done, Miss Bernie said, Angela, I like that idea, but I think it would work better if I was actually the one in the car. Liza said, absolutely not, Bernie. If this goes bad, Miss Bernie said, my big mouth is why we're in this situation. I'm not putting anybody else in danger. Pretending to be me, walking into a trap, and trying to fool these psychopaths. If something was wrong with one of these babies for real, and they had to be transported to a medical facility, I'd be the one doing it. Who knows what they plan on doing to me in order to get the baby from me? Liza said, the likelihood that they're going to do anything is slim, considering that you're doing exactly what they asked. But I'm sure that when the plan is all flushed out, this operation will end in a gunfight, and you don't need to be involved. Miss Bernie said, I was born and bred in Texas. I know my way around a gun. Angela, I don't care what she says, and I don't care what you want to do. If anybody's walking into that trap, it's going to be me. I owe it to these babies. I owe it to this whole family. I have to see this through. The Queen Mother said, Bernie, I get why you feel responsible for this. And after all that has happened and the part that you've played in it over the years, I get why you feel like you need to redeem yourself. But this ain't it, girl. Them people crazy. They will reset your entire algorithm. And you ain't built for none of this. Angela's in charge. Let her handle the planning. Let a professional do this job. Don't sacrifice yourself trying to be the hero. This family has had one too many deaths. And I'm not all that interested in going to your damn funeral. Then Miss Bernie lifted her pants leg, and on her ankle was a tracking device that looked an awful lot like an ankle monitor provided by law enforcement. And the Queen Mother said, damn. Miss Bernie said, unless you know a way to get this off and on somebody else's leg, I'd suggest that we play it their way and mine. And then she watched while all three of the women's faces fell. It was clear that Miss Bernie was not getting out of this. And if they went through with the plan, Miss Bernie might not get out of it alive. Meanwhile, in Denver, Bosch was in the kitchen, smack dab in the middle of a conversation with the lieutenant heading up the security team at Big Wood's cabin. When True walked in, pissed. She said, Bosch, what the hell did you tell Stacks? Seeing the lieutenant standing there, she said, pardon me. Break up whatever this is. Head outside. I need to holler at your boy. When the lieutenant excused himself from the house, Bosch looked at True and said, what the hell you talking about, shorty? True said, come in my room. I don't want to talk on camera. When they got inside her room, True turned into a spider monkey. She swept his legs out from under him and attacked. When Bosch landed on the bed, he looked at True and said, what's up? And True said, I'm gonna need that. That little meeting or whatever was lasting too long. I had to get him out of here so I could get what I need. And Bosch fell out laughing. He said, I love your enthusiasm, but you're not gonna be handling me like a little nigga. Now you got that nigga thinking that I'm being reprimanded. True said, you are, for taking too long. My hormones are raging, and I have in-house D. I ain't gonna be waiting for it. Then she promptly undressed Bosch, undressed herself, climbed on top of him, straddled him, and turned into Megan Thee Stallion. She rode him from the front, the back, the side, and after using him to get off 3 times, she said, get yours and get out. Go finish your little meeting. And Bosch's flabbers were gasted.